Welcome to an hour of festive warmth and magic. In this video, we'll take you on a journey through timeless Christmas stories that will fill your heart with the joy and wonder of the season. So, get comfy, grab a warm drink, and let these tales transport you to a world of holiday cheer. Let's begin. The first story, The Christmas Wish. Chapter 1, The Snowbound Village. The small village of Frostwood lay nestled in a valley surrounded by towering, snow-capped mountains. In winter, the entire town seemed to transform into a living Christmas card. Icicles hung from the eaves of the timber-framed houses, glistening like crystal chandeliers, and a fresh blanket of snow covered the cobblestone streets, muffling the sound of footsteps and carriage wheels. Every December, the townspeople worked tirelessly to make Frostwood's Christmas market the most magical in the region. Lanterns were strung across the square, casting a warm, golden glow over the colorful stalls brimming with handmade toys, spiced pastries, and glittering ornaments. For most, Frostwood during Christmas time was a place of joy and celebration. But for Clara, it was a time of quiet longing. At just 12 years old, she had already endured more than her fair share of hardship. Orphaned at a young age, Clara had been taken in by her aunt and uncle, who ran a modest bakery on the edge of the village. They were not unkind, but their focus was always on the business, leaving little time for the warmth of family Clara so desperately craved. On this particular December afternoon, Clara stood just outside the bustling market square, watching the festivities from a distance. She hugged her patched coat tightly around her as the cold wind nipped at her cheeks. Her breath formed little clouds in the air as she sighed, her gaze lingering on a group of children her age gathered around a toy stall. They laughed and pointed at the wooden soldiers and porcelain dolls, their eyes sparkling with excitement. Clara turned away. She didn't belong in their world of shiny new toys and cheerful families. Her days were spent delivering loaves of bread and scrubbing baking trays, not choosing gifts or decorating trees. Still, a small ember of hope burned in her chest. This year would be different, she told herself. This Christmas, she would find a way to feel the magic everyone else seemed to experience. She wandered further into the square, her curiosity getting the better of her. The scents of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon filled the air, mingling with the sound of carolers singing in harmony. Clara paused near a stall selling hand-carved ornaments. Her fingers itched to reach out and touch a delicate wooden star, its edges painted with gold leaf. "Lovely, isn't it?" the vendor said, a kind smile on his weathered face. Clara quickly pulled her hand back and nodded. "I'm just looking," she mumbled, embarrassed by her inability to afford even the smallest trinket. The man didn't press her, instead turning to another customer, and Clara moved on, weaving her way through the crowd. As she walked, she overheard snippets of conversation, a family discussing their Christmas feast, a child boasting about the gifts they expected to receive, an elderly woman sharing a story about her childhood. It was the latter that caught Clara's attention. She slowed her steps, tilting her head to listen. "And every Christmas Eve, the wishing star appears," the old woman was saying to a group of wide-eyed children. "It shines brighter than any star in the sky, and if your heart is pure, you can make one wish, and it will come true." "Does it really work?" one of the children asked. The woman chuckled, her eyes twinkling like the star she described. "Ah, but that's the mystery, isn't it? Some say it's just a legend, but others believe the star chooses those who need it most. You'll never know unless you try." Clara's heart quickened. She had heard bits and pieces of the wishing star legend before but had never given it much thought. Could it be real? And if it was, could it be the answer to her unspoken wish? She didn't have time to dwell on the idea. A sharp voice called her name, cutting through the festive noise. "Clara! There you are!" She turned to see her aunt bustling toward her, her apron dusted with flour and her face flushed from the cold. "What are you doing out here? The bakery's packed, and we need you to help with the orders." Clara nodded, her moment of wonder slipping away. "I'm coming," she said softly. As she followed her aunt back through the winding streets, the story of the wishing star lingered in her mind. That night, as she lay on her narrow cot in the tiny room above the bakery, Clara stared out the frost-covered window at the glittering sky. Among the countless stars, she searched for one that seemed brighter, more magical than the others. She didn't find it, but her heart whispered a promise to herself. If the wishing star was real, she would find it. And she would make her wish. Little did she know, her journey was about to begin. Chapter 2, The Wishing Star. The following days in Frostwood passed in a flurry of holiday preparations. The bakery was busier than ever, with villagers stopping by to pick up fresh loaves of bread, pastries, and cakes for their Christmas feasts. Clara spent long hours kneading dough, sweeping the flour-dusted floor, and running deliveries through the snow-covered streets. Though her hands ached and her legs were tired by the end of each day, her thoughts kept drifting back to the legend of the wishing star. It wasn't just a story to her now. The idea of making a wish, a single, pure wish that could change everything, sparked something in her that she hadn't felt in years: hope. Late one evening, as the bakery finally quieted and her aunt and uncle went to bed, Clara crept down the stairs and out the door. The sky was clear, the cold air crisp and sharp against her skin. She tipped her head back, her breath forming clouds as she scanned the heavens. The stars were brilliant, scattered like shards of diamonds across a velvet black sky, but none stood out as the one from the legend. She sighed, her shoulders sinking. Maybe it really was just a story. But as she turned to head back inside, something caught her eye. On the far horizon, barely visible above the line of snowy hills, was a single star shining brighter than the rest. It pulsed with a soft, golden light, almost as if it were calling to her. Clara froze, her heart racing. Could it be the wishing star? She couldn't be sure, but deep in her chest, a voice seemed to answer her question: "Find me." The next morning, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to do something. She couldn't ignore the pull of that distant light. As she worked in the bakery, handing out warm loaves to cheerful customers, she considered her options. How could she even begin to find the star? It was far beyond the hills, perhaps even beyond the mountains that framed Frostwood. She had no map, no supplies, and no way to explain her absence to her aunt and uncle. But she also knew she couldn't let the chance slip away. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Clara packed what little she could: a piece of bread wrapped in cloth, a scarf for extra warmth, and a small lantern. She tucked the items into her satchel and slipped out the door, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The snow crunched under her boots as she made her way through the quiet village, its streets empty and its windows dark. As she passed the market square, she stopped short. There, in the shadows of a closed stall, sat the old woman she'd overheard days before. The woman seemed to be waiting for her. She smiled knowingly as Clara approached, her eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "You've seen it, haven't you?" the woman asked, her voice soft but firm. Clara hesitated. "The star?" The woman nodded. "The wishing star. It's rare for anyone to see it, let alone a child. It must have chosen you." Clara's cheeks flushed. "Chosen me? Why would it choose me?" "Because your heart is true," the woman said simply. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, star-shaped charm, its surface shimmering like polished gold. "Take this. It will guide you." Clara accepted the charm with trembling hands. It was warm to the touch, as though it held a bit of the star's light inside it. "How will it guide me?" she asked. The woman smiled mysteriously. "Hold it when you're unsure, and it will show you the way. But be warned, child. The journey to the wishing star is not an easy one. You will face challenges, some that test your strength, others that test your heart. But if you remain steadfast, you will find what you seek." Clara looked down at the charm, its glow comforting and steady. "Thank you," she said earnestly. The woman nodded and turned, disappearing into the shadows as if she had never been there at all. With the charm in her pocket and a spark of courage in her heart, Clara set off toward the hills, the golden star on the horizon guiding her steps. The cold bit at her cheeks, and the snow grew deeper as she left the village behind. But with each step, her resolve grew stronger. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain: she would find the wishing star, no matter how far she had to go. The journey had begun. Chapter 3, Into the Wild. Clara's journey began in the quiet, moonlit fields that surrounded Frostwood. The soft crunch of snow under her boots and the distant hoot of an owl were the only sounds accompanying her as she walked toward the distant hills. The golden star shimmered on the horizon, a tiny but unwavering beacon against the vast, inky sky. Her scarf was wrapped tightly around her face to shield her from the icy wind, and she clutched her small lantern in one gloved hand, its light flickering but steady. Though her steps faltered occasionally, the star-shaped charm in her pocket seemed to radiate a quiet reassurance, as if urging her onward. By the time the first light of dawn tinged the sky with pink and gold, Clara had reached the base of the hills. She paused to catch her breath, gazing up at the snow-draped slopes that loomed ahead. The charm felt warm in her pocket, and she pulled it out, holding it in her palm. "How do I get there?" she whispered, unsure if she was speaking to the charm, the star, or herself. The charm gave a faint glow, and for a brief moment, the snow in front of her seemed to shimmer. A narrow, winding path appeared, cutting through the otherwise untouched white expanse. Clara blinked in surprise. The path hadn't been there before, or had it? With her resolve renewed, she adjusted her scarf and began climbing. The path was narrow and steep, and the snow made it slippery, but Clara pressed on. As she ascended, the world behind her grew smaller, the village of Frostwood shrinking into a collection of tiny rooftops and chimneys trailing wisps of smoke. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, its light bouncing off the snow in dazzling brilliance, but its warmth did little to melt the icy chill in the air. Clara's legs ached, and her stomach growled, reminding her of the small loaf of bread tucked in her satchel. She stopped to rest under the branches of a fir tree, brushing snow off a low bough to sit. As she chewed on the bread, she looked out at the landscape spreading below her. The beauty of it struck her, endless fields of white, sparkling like diamonds, and a horizon where the sky seemed to meet the earth in a seamless blur of light and shadow. For the first time in years, she felt something akin to peace. But the peace didn't last. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the hills, and Clara jolted to her feet. The sound came again, closer this time. It was followed by the low growl of an animal. Her heart leapt into her throat as she scanned her surroundings. Emerging from the shadows of the trees was a wolf, its silver fur blending almost perfectly with the snow. Its yellow eyes were fixed on her, unblinking and intense. Clara's breath hitched. She had heard stories of wolves attacking travelers, especially in the harsh winters when food was scarce. She gripped the lantern in one hand and the charm in the other, her mind racing. What could she do? Running would be futile, the wolf would catch her in moments. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't want to hurt you." The wolf took a step closer, its growl deepening. Clara's fingers tightened around the charm, and she felt a sudden surge of warmth. Without thinking, she held the charm out in front of her. The star-shaped trinket glowed brighter than ever, casting a soft, golden light across the snow. The wolf hesitated, its growl faltering. Its ears perked, and for a moment, it simply stared at the light. Then, to Clara's astonishment, it lowered its head and backed away, disappearing into the trees as silently as it had come. Clara's knees buckled, and she sank back onto the snow, her heart hammering in her chest. She stared at the charm, its glow fading back to a soft warmth. Whatever power it held, it had saved her. "Thank you," she murmured, clutching the charm tightly. She didn't know who or what she was thanking, the star, the charm, or something else entirely, but her gratitude was genuine. After a few moments, she forced herself to her feet and continued up the path. The encounter with the wolf had left her shaken, but it had also deepened her resolve. If the journey to the wishing star was filled with dangers like this, then she would face them head-on. She had come too far to turn back now. As the day wore on, the landscape around her began to change. The hills grew steeper, the trees sparser, and the air colder. By the time the sun began to sink below the horizon, Clara had reached a narrow ridge that offered a breathtaking view of the mountains ahead. The golden star still shone brightly, its light seeming closer now, as if she were finally making progress. But as darkness fell, the cold became almost unbearable. Clara's hands and feet were numb, and her breath came in short, frosty puffs. She needed shelter, and soon. She scanned the ridge for any sign of a cave or overhang, but the terrain was unforgiving. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a faint flicker of light. It was coming from a cluster of trees further along the ridge. Clara hesitated. It could be dangerous, a trap or something worse. But the thought of spending the night exposed to the elements made her decision for her. Gathering her courage, she followed the light. As she drew closer, the source of the glow became clear, a small, weathered cabin nestled among the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney, and the warm light of a fire flickered through the frosted windows. Clara's heart leapt with relief. She hurried to the door and knocked, her gloved hand trembling from cold and exhaustion. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with a long, white beard and twinkling blue eyes. He wore a thick woolen sweater, and the warmth from the fire behind him spilled out into the freezing night. "Well, now," he said, his voice rich and kind. "What brings a young one like you out here in the middle of nowhere?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But the man's kind eyes and the inviting warmth of the cabin eased her nerves. "I'm looking for the wishing star," she said simply. The man raised an eyebrow but didn't laugh or dismiss her. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. "Come in, child. You can tell me all about it over a bowl of stew." Gratefully, Clara stepped into the cabin, leaving the cold and the vast, snow-covered wilderness behind. Little did she know, this encounter would be the first of many that would shape her journey, and her understanding of what she truly wished for. Chapter 4, The Keeper of Stories. Clara stepped into the warmth of the cabin, the biting cold replaced by the comforting glow of a roaring fire. The scent of wood smoke mingled with something savory bubbling in a pot on the hearth. She tugged off her gloves and scarf, feeling the blood return to her frozen fingers and cheeks. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the modest but cozy space, a single bed pushed against one wall, shelves lined with books and jars of dried herbs, and a carved wooden table in the center of the room. The elderly man closed the door behind her, bolting it against the howling wind outside. He crossed the room with surprising swiftness for someone his age, lifting the pot from the fire and ladling thick stew into a pair of mismatched bowls. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs at the table. His voice was warm but carried a note of authority that made it clear she should obey. Clara didn't hesitate. She slid into the chair, the warmth of the fire wrapping around her like a blanket. The man placed a steaming bowl in front of her and settled into the chair across from her. He watched as she lifted the spoon to her lips and took her first bite. The stew was rich and hearty, warming her from the inside out. "This is delicious," Clara said, her voice thick with gratitude. The man smiled. "Food always tastes better after a cold journey. Now, tell me, child, why are you out here chasing stars?" Clara hesitated, unsure how much to share. But something about the man's kind eyes and the quiet wisdom in his demeanor put her at ease. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the star-shaped charm, holding it up for him to see. "I saw the star," she began. "The wishing star. It feels like it's calling me. I don't know why, but I have to find it. The charm, it's helping me." The man leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the charm. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, but he said nothing. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. "Do you know the story of the wishing star?" he asked. Clara nodded. "It grants one wish to anyone pure of heart. That's all I know." The man's eyes twinkled. "That's the short version. But the star's history is long and full of mystery. Some say it was born from the first spark of light that broke the darkness when the world began. Others believe it's a fragment of a fallen star, imbued with the wishes of those who look to the heavens in their darkest moments." He paused, his gaze growing distant. "The star doesn't choose lightly. Those who see its light are meant to undertake a journey, not just across mountains and forests, but within themselves. The wish it grants is never what one expects." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" The man tapped the side of his nose. "That's for you to discover. But know this, the wishing star doesn't merely give, it also reveals. It shows people their true desires, the ones buried so deep they might not even realize they exist." Clara's stomach twisted. She thought of her parents, of the way the bakery felt more like a prison than a home. Her wish was clear, or so she thought. "I just want to find it," she said softly. "I don't know what else to do." The man studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, crossing to one of the shelves. He pulled down an old, leather-bound book and set it on the table in front of her. The cover was embossed with a star, its edges worn smooth by time. "This might help," he said. "It's a collection of stories about the star, some true, some mere legend. But every journey to the wishing star is unique. Perhaps these tales will guide you." Clara opened the book carefully, the pages crackling with age. The text was handwritten, each word flowing elegantly across the page. As she skimmed the first few lines, she felt a strange connection to the words, as though the stories were meant for her. "Thank you," she said, looking up at the man. He smiled. "Rest here tonight, child. The path ahead is treacherous, and you'll need your strength. But be warned, the journey only grows harder from here." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. She spent the rest of the evening poring over the book, each story filling her with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. There were tales of travelers who had succeeded in reaching the star, their wishes changing their lives in ways they hadn't anticipated. There were also cautionary tales of those who failed, undone by doubt, fear, or greed. By the time she closed the book, the fire had burned low, and her eyes were heavy with sleep. The old man offered her his bed, insisting he would sleep by the fire. Exhaustion overcame her protests, and she soon drifted off, the star-shaped charm clutched tightly in her hand. When Clara woke the next morning, the old man was gone. A note rested on the table beside a bundle of supplies, a loaf of bread, a small flask of water, and a thick woolen cloak. "The star calls to you, child. Trust the charm, and trust yourself. Safe travels." Clara tucked the supplies into her satchel and wrapped the cloak around her shoulders. The chill in the air was sharper than the day before, and the sky was heavy with clouds. Still, the golden star glimmered faintly on the horizon, its light unwavering. As she stepped out of the cabin, she felt a strange sense of loss, as though leaving behind an old friend. But she also felt stronger, the old man's words and the book's stories echoing in her mind. The path ahead was steep and uncertain, but Clara was ready to face whatever challenges awaited her. She tightened her grip on the lantern, the charm warm in her pocket, and began to climb once more. Chapter 5, The Forest of Echoes. Clara's feet crunched on the frozen ground as she walked deeper into the forest. The path, once clear and wide, narrowed as the trees thickened, their bare branches stretching out like skeletal fingers, blocking out much of the sky. The air grew colder with each step, and a quiet hush settled over the woods. It felt as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting. The charm in her pocket had grown warm again, a faint hum pulsing from it, just like the night before. Clara reached into her coat pocket and pulled it out, holding it in her hand. The star-shaped pendant was glowing softly now, a pale blue light flickering from its center. She stared at it, mesmerized by the delicate pattern of light it cast on her palm. It was as if the star itself was alive, responding to her every move. "You're close," she whispered to herself, though she had no idea how she knew. The wind picked up, sending a shiver through her spine. She turned her head, noticing that the path seemed to disappear into thick mist ahead. It was strange, just moments ago, the path had been clear and defined, but now, it was as if the fog had crept in from nowhere, swirling around her like a thick veil. Clara hesitated. The mist seemed to beckon her, as though it wanted to pull her deeper into the woods. The trees, too, seemed to change. The once bare branches now appeared to have small, delicate whispers hanging from them, soft, glimmering threads of what looked like spider silk. But as Clara took a step forward, she realized that the threads weren't just decorative, they were vibrating. Suddenly, a voice, faint but clear, echoed through the trees, "Who seeks the wishing star?" Clara stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. The voice didn't sound threatening, more curious, as if the trees themselves were questioning her. She turned in every direction, but there was no one in sight. "I do," Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I seek the wishing star." The forest fell silent, the air heavy with expectation. Then, from the trees came a rustling sound, as though the very earth beneath her feet was whispering in response. The glowing charm in her hand pulsed once, and Clara felt a shift in the atmosphere. Something ancient and powerful stirred deep within the forest. "Then you must prove yourself," the voice said again, now seeming to come from all around her. "The wishing star does not grant its wish to those unworthy. You must first face the trials of the forest." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Trials? What trials? The trees around her seemed to bend closer, their bark now etched with strange markings that hadn't been there before. The mist swirled thicker, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Then, a low, melodic sound rang out, a bell, distant but clear. The voice returned, "You will hear the bell 3 times. Each time, you must make a choice. Your answers will shape your fate." Clara felt the weight of those words settle upon her. She didn't know what these trials were, but she knew one thing for certain, there was no turning back. She had come this far, and the wishing star was just beyond the fog. The bell rang again, its sound sharp and clear. Clara took a deep breath and walked forward, her hand instinctively reaching for the charm. The glow brightened in response, as though the star was guiding her steps. The path ahead was now barely visible, the mist swirling and shifting as though it were alive. She moved carefully, watching for any sign of the trials ahead. The air grew colder, the silence almost suffocating. Then, as she took another step, the mist began to clear, only to reveal a vast clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a large, ancient tree. Its trunk was gnarled and twisted, with wide, hollowed-out spaces that looked like eyes. The tree seemed to watch her as she approached, its branches heavy with the same shimmering threads. And there, at the base of the tree, was a small wooden chest. The bell rang again, and Clara knew this was her first trial. The voice echoed again, calm yet unyielding. "Open the chest, and you will find a key. But choose carefully. The key you take will determine the path you walk." Clara's gaze fell to the chest. It was old, the wood worn smooth by time, but the lock was still intact. She could see that there were 2 keys inside, one made of bright gold, the other dull and rusted. The choice seemed obvious. The golden key gleamed in the faint light, promising ease, success, and perhaps even the wishing star itself. The rusted key, however, seemed cold and uninviting. It didn't spark any sense of hope. Clara felt her fingers twitch, reaching instinctively toward the golden key. But then, as her hand hovered over it, She remembered the stories from the book. They had all warned of the dangers of choosing the easy way. Something told her that the golden key might not be the right choice. She pulled her hand back, her heart pounding in her chest. With a steadying breath, Clara reached for the rusted key. It felt heavy in her hand, its surface rough and uneven. But as soon as her fingers wrapped around it, the mist around her seemed to part just a little more, as though the forest itself was acknowledging her decision. The bell rang a third time, its sound deeper this time, resonating in the air with an ominous thrum. Clara stood tall, holding the key. She felt a new sense of purpose within her, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. And then, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The ancient tree groaned, its roots twisting and shifting, and Clara knew, this was just the beginning. The trials were far from over, but the wishing star was closer now than ever before. Chapter 6, The Gatekeeper's Test. The ground trembled beneath Clara's feet, the echo of the ancient tree's groan reverberating through the forest. The air seemed to crackle with a strange energy, and the mist, though still thick, began to swirl in patterns around her, as if guiding her toward the next trial. Clara's grip tightened around the rusted key, feeling its cold weight in her palm. The decision to take it had felt right, but now, with the tree groaning and the path ahead unclear, she couldn't shake the sense of unease creeping up her spine. The clearing around her began to shift. The space, once wide and open, was now narrowing, closing in on itself as if the forest itself was reshaping to contain her. The trees bent closer, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers. The mist thickened, making it harder to see more than a few feet ahead. But just as she started to feel a wave of panic rise within her, the bell rang once again, sharp and clear. The bell's toll seemed to still the forest for a moment, leaving behind a haunting silence. Then, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, emerging from the fog. Clara froze. It was a tall, thin figure, cloaked in shadows, standing motionless against the backdrop of the trees. The figure had no face, just a deep, dark hood that obscured everything above its chest. But Clara could feel the weight of its gaze on her, like it was watching her every move, judging her. It was the gatekeeper. The figure raised its hand slowly, pointing toward the path ahead. As it did, a deep voice rang out from the shadows, the words almost like a growl. "The trials are far from over, child," the voice said, resonating with an ancient authority. "You have chosen the key, but you have yet to prove your worth. To pass through this gate, you must face your deepest fear." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had heard tales of the gatekeeper, an ancient being tasked with guarding the passage to the wishing star. The stories warned that to face the gatekeeper was to face oneself. But Clara had never expected it to be like this. What do you mean by deepest fear?" Clara managed to ask, her voice trembling despite her efforts to remain calm. The gatekeeper tilted its head slightly, as though considering her question. "The forest knows your heart, child. It knows what lies hidden within you. You must confront it, or you will never pass. The wishing star is not granted to the weak of spirit." Clara's mind raced. What could her deepest fear be? She had never thought of herself as afraid of anything, but now, standing before the gatekeeper, doubt crept in. What was it that she had been running from all this time? She had come so far to find the wishing star, to make her wish, but what if the price was more than she had bargained for? The gatekeeper's voice echoed again, more forceful this time. "You will enter the forest of mirrors. There, you will face the reflection of your soul. Do not shy away from what you see, for it will be the only way to prove your strength." Clara took a deep breath, gathering her resolve. The forest was quiet now, almost too quiet, as if everything was waiting for her to make her move. She stepped forward, holding the rusted key tightly in her hand. Without a word, the gatekeeper gestured again, and a hidden gate materialized in the fog, a large, wrought iron archway entwined with vines. The key in Clara's hand began to pulse, a faint warmth radiating from it, as if responding to the gate. Her fingers trembled as she slid the key into the lock. The gate creaked open, and beyond it lay a narrow path, obscured by thick fog. The mist swirled around her ankles as she walked through, each step feeling heavier than the last. The forest around her seemed to watch in silence, the trees shifting ever so slightly, as if anticipating what would happen next. As Clara moved deeper into the fog, the air grew colder. The path stretched on, but no sounds of wildlife or wind disturbed the silence. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, only the soft sound of her own footsteps. The key in her pocket pulsed again, its light flickering briefly in the darkening mist. And then, the forest opened up before her, revealing what looked like a cavernous clearing. But it wasn't the kind of clearing Clara had expected. No, this one was different. The ground was covered in shattered pieces of glass, glittering like stars beneath her feet. At the center of the clearing stood a tall, ornate mirror, its frame wrought in intricate designs of twisting vines and flowers. It seemed to shimmer, as if it were alive, its surface rippling like water in a gentle breeze. Clara stepped closer, her heart racing. She could see her reflection, but something was wrong. The woman in the mirror didn't look quite like her. Her features were distorted, her eyes hollow and dark, her skin pale as though drained of color. Clara's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't her reflection. It was a version of herself, twisted and broken. It was the face of someone who had given up, someone who had lost all hope. The reflection in the mirror moved, mimicking her every motion at first. But then, it began to smile, a slow, chilling smile that didn't belong to her. Clara's heart pounded in her chest. The woman in the mirror spoke, her voice low and mocking. "You think you can conquer the trials, don't you?" The reflection sneered. "But deep down, you know you're not strong enough. You've always been weak, Clara. You've always run from your fears. You're nothing but a coward." Clara recoiled, the words cutting deep into her. She shook her head, denying the reflection's words. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. Could it be true? Was she really running from something? Her heart raced, her mind spinning with doubt. She had come so far, further than anyone had expected her to, and yet, here in the forest, in front of this twisted mirror, she felt smaller than ever. The reflection in the mirror's smile widened, and it took a step toward her. "Face me, Clara. Face the truth. You've always hidden from what you fear the most. You think this wish will change everything, but it won't. You'll only be left with more regret." Clara's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wasn't going to let this mirror define her. She wasn't going to let this twisted version of herself hold her back. She had a goal, and she had to stay true to it. With a deep breath, Clara squared her shoulders. She raised her chin, looking straight into the eyes of the reflection. "I'm not afraid of you," she said firmly. "I'm not afraid of my own fear. I've come this far, and I won't turn back now." The mirror's smile faltered, the mocking expression faltering for just a moment. Then, with a sudden shudder, the reflection shattered, the glass splintering and falling to the ground like raindrops. Clara stood alone in the clearing, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had done it. She had faced her fear. She had proven that she was strong enough, but the trials weren't over. The path ahead was still uncertain, and the wishing star was still just out of reach. With renewed determination, Clara took another step forward, ready for whatever came next. The forest had tested her, but she knew now that she could handle anything it threw her way. Chapter 7, The Heart of the Forest. Clara's footsteps echoed softly as she walked deeper into the mist-shrouded woods. The clearing behind her had disappeared, swallowed by the dense fog that now clung to her like a second skin. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of pine and earth. The further she went, the more the trees seemed to loom above her, their twisted trunks like silent sentinels guarding secrets older than time itself. The path, narrow and winding, seemed to stretch on endlessly, disappearing into the distance where the fog was so thick it felt like a wall. Clara's heart beat in time with her steps, steady but full of anticipation. She had passed the gatekeeper's trial, faced her own fear in the mirror's reflection. But the wishing star, her goal, was still just out of reach. She could feel its pull, like a distant star calling her forward, urging her on. There was something about this journey that was beginning to feel like more than just a wish. The deeper she ventured into the heart of the forest, the more she felt connected to the very soul of it, as though she were part of a greater story that had been written long before her birth. Suddenly, the fog parted, revealing a vast, ancient tree that stood at the center of a small clearing. The tree was enormous, its roots twisting through the ground like veins of an ancient creature. Its bark was smooth, dark, and glistened with what appeared to be drops of dew, though Clara could feel no moisture in the air. Its branches stretched high above her, so tall that they seemed to disappear into the clouds. The leaves, however, were different from the rest of the forest. They shimmered in every color imaginable, golds, reds, and deep blues that changed as the light shifted, almost as if the tree itself was alive with the energy of the seasons. Clara took a step toward the tree, drawn in by its majestic presence. There was something about it that felt familiar, almost as though it had been waiting for her all along. She reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing the bark. The moment she touched it, a sudden rush of warmth surged through her, radiating from the tree itself. Her vision blurred, and she felt a sense of vertigo as the world around her seemed to tilt. For a moment, The forest fell away. Instead of standing before an ancient tree, Clara was now in a vast, starry void. The ground beneath her feet was gone, and all she could see was the endless expanse of twinkling lights. She was floating in space, her body weightless, surrounded by a cosmic sea of stars. In the distance, she could see something faintly glowing, a bright light that pulsed rhythmically, like the heartbeat of the universe. She wasn't alone. There, standing beside her in the vastness of space, was a figure, tall, cloaked, and faintly glowing. The figure's face was hidden in shadow, but Clara knew instinctively who it was. It was the same figure from the forest, the gatekeeper. "You have come far, Clara," the gatekeeper's voice rang out, as though it were coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "But the heart of the forest is not just a place, it is a choice. The wishing star is not something to be taken lightly. It is a manifestation of your deepest desires, your truest self. But with great power comes great responsibility." Clara opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She wanted to ask so many questions. What did it all mean? What was this cosmic place? But before she could gather her thoughts, the gatekeeper continued. "You seek the wishing star because you believe it will grant you the one thing you desire most. But do you know what that is? Have you truly asked yourself what it is you wish for?" The words hit Clara like a thunderclap. Had she really thought about it? She had wanted the wishing star for so long, had come all this way, but had she truly understood what she was hoping for? "The path you have taken will not only shape your future, Clara. It will shape the very fabric of your soul," the gatekeeper continued, its presence both calming and unsettling. "Every choice you make here, every step you take, will change you. The wishing star will not give you what you expect, but rather what you truly need." Clara's heart thudded in her chest. The world around her seemed to bend, the stars swirling as though they were alive, reacting to the gatekeeper's words. "You must make a decision," the gatekeeper's voice echoed. "Do you wish for power, for wealth, for love? Or do you wish for understanding? For peace? The wishing star reflects the truest nature of your heart. But beware, for the star cannot be undone once it is chosen." Clara closed her eyes, breathing deeply. The stars around her seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heart, as if they, too, were waiting for her answer. Her mind raced. What did she truly need? What had brought her here in the first place? The answer wasn't immediate. It wasn't something she could pull from her thoughts like a simple wish. It was deeper than that, buried within her soul, hidden beneath layers of doubt and fear. She had come here with a desire for change, for something to fix her broken life. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the change she sought wasn't an external one. It wasn't something she could simply wish for. It had to come from within. Clara's breath caught in her throat as a realization washed over her. The wishing star wasn't about getting what she wanted. It was about becoming who she was meant to be. "I wish," she whispered, the words heavy with meaning, "to understand myself, to find peace within, no matter what happens." The moment the words left her mouth, the stars above her exploded in a burst of brilliant light. The light surrounded her, filling her senses, and she felt herself being pulled back toward the tree. The cosmic void was gone, replaced once again by the dense fog and the towering presence of the ancient tree. Clara blinked as her surroundings came into focus. The tree's bark seemed to glow with an inner light, brighter than before. The leaves above her shimmered in a dazzling array of colors, casting dancing shadows across the forest floor. It was as though the entire forest had transformed, responding to her wish. The gatekeeper stood before her, now more visible than before, its features softening. "You have chosen wisely," the figure said. "The wishing star will now reveal itself to you. But remember, Clara, peace and understanding come not from the wish you make, but from the journey you take to find them." Clara nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She didn't need the star to fix her life. She already had everything she needed within herself. The journey had been long, and the trials had tested her, but she had come to understand that true strength came from accepting who she was and trusting in her ability to face whatever came next. The gatekeeper stepped aside, gesturing toward the heart of the forest. And there, glowing softly in the center of the clearing, was the wishing star, its light soft and warm, like the glow of a candle in the dark. It shone brighter than any star in the sky, but Clara knew now that its light was not what mattered. It was the journey that had led her here, the lessons learned, the courage found within herself, that had made all the difference. With a final glance at the gatekeeper, Clara walked toward the star, ready to take the next step on her journey. The forest had taught her that the path to peace wasn't found in wishes, it was found in the heart of the forest, and in the heart of herself. Chapter 8, The Wishing Star. The moment Clara stepped closer to the wishing star, she felt a subtle shift in the air, as if the entire forest exhaled with her. The dense fog that had surrounded the clearing began to dissipate, and for the first time since she entered the woods, she could see the sky. It was no longer an impenetrable curtain of mist, but a soft expanse of starlit blackness, dotted with tiny, shimmering points of light. The forest, too, seemed to change. The trees stretched higher, their branches spreading outward in a way that made the clearing feel even more vast and open. The wishing star itself was everything Clara had imagined and more. It floated above the ground, casting a soft, golden glow that lit up the surrounding area. Its light was warm, gentle, and inviting, like the embrace of an old friend after a long separation. As Clara moved toward it, the star seemed to hum with an energy that resonated deep within her soul. There was a quiet song to its glow, a melody only she could hear, one that spoke to something deep inside of her. She stopped just in front of the star, transfixed by its beauty. It didn't look like a typical star, it wasn't a cold, distant pinprick of light in the sky. Instead, it was a luminous orb, its surface swirling with patterns of gold, silver, and soft blue, constantly shifting and moving, as if it were alive. The air around it was still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Clara reached out a hand, hesitating just before she made contact with the star. The gatekeeper's warning echoed in her mind. This was no ordinary wish. The wishing star would grant her deepest desire, but at what cost? But then Clara remembered everything she had learned on this journey. She had come so far, not just physically but emotionally. The trials, the tests, the strange encounters along the way, they had all brought her to this moment, a moment where she had to face her own heart, her own soul. She no longer wanted the wishing star to fix her or to grant her a wish based on what she thought she needed. What she truly sought now wasn't a change in her circumstances, but a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. Clara took a deep breath and, with newfound clarity, reached out and touched the surface of the wishing star. The moment her fingers brushed against the glowing orb, she was enveloped in a soft, radiant light. It wasn't blinding, rather, it was a warm, comforting glow, like the sun breaking through the clouds on a chilly morning. For a moment, Clara felt weightless, as if she was floating in that ethereal light, suspended in time. The world around her seemed to fade away. The sound of the wind, the rustling of the trees, even the soft hum of the wishing star, everything disappeared, and Clara was left alone in the light. She couldn't see anything but the glow around her, but she could feel everything. Every beat of her heart. Every breath. Every part of her that had been searching for meaning, for peace, for understanding. It was as if the wishing star was a mirror, reflecting her deepest self, the essence of who she was. The light grew brighter, and suddenly, the scene around her began to shift. Clara was no longer standing in the clearing, but instead, she found herself in a different place, a small, humble room, dimly lit by a single candle. The room was filled with warmth, a cozy, welcoming atmosphere. The walls were made of thick wooden beams, and there was a fireplace crackling softly in the corner. She could hear the sound of a clock ticking in the background, its rhythmic ticks creating a sense of calm. There, sitting by the fire, was a young woman. She was reading a book, her back turned to Clara. Her long hair cascaded down her back in soft waves, and the flickering light of the fire danced on her face. There was something strangely familiar about her. Clara couldn't place it at first, but as she gazed at the woman, a feeling of recognition washed over her. She had seen her before, in dreams, in memories she couldn't quite recall. But now, standing in this room, everything became clear. The woman looked up, as though she sensed Clara's presence. Her eyes met Clara's, and in them, Clara saw something that made her heart skip a beat. It was as if the woman knew her, as if they had shared a lifetime together, though Clara could not remember when. She had seen those eyes before, felt their warmth before, but where? "Do you remember, Clara?" the woman asked, her voice soft but full of knowing. "Do you remember what you saw all this time?" Clara's throat went dry. She wanted to answer, but the words wouldn't come. There was a pull in her chest, an ache, a longing to understand. The woman smiled gently, almost as though she was waiting for Clara to piece it all together. "The wishing star," the woman continued, her voice like a melody that echoed in Clara's mind. "It doesn't grant what you think you want. It gives you what you truly need, the answers to the questions you've always carried with you." Clara's heart raced as she began to understand. This was no stranger. This woman was a reflection of herself, a part of her she had buried long ago. She had been searching for something outside of herself, something to change her life, to fix her. But now, Clara realized, the wishing star had shown her something more profound. The woman in the room stood up slowly and walked toward Clara, her footsteps light and graceful. She reached out, taking Clara's hands in her own. The warmth from her touch spread through Clara, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt whole. "You've been looking for yourself," the woman said, her voice barely a whisper. "The peace you seek is not in a distant wish, but within you. It always has been." Clara's breath caught in her throat as everything clicked into place. She wasn't lost. She didn't need to be fixed. She needed to remember who she was, to understand her own heart. The wishing star hadn't shown her a future or a solution, it had shown her the truth, that the answers she sought were always inside her. She had the power to create the life she wanted, to find the peace she craved, and to heal the wounds she had carried for so long. The light around her began to fade, and the scene shifted once again. Clara was back in the clearing, standing before the wishing star. The glow of the star still pulsed softly, but now it seemed less important. The forest, once shrouded in mist, was now full of life, the trees reaching toward the sky in a way that felt comforting and familiar. Clara felt lighter than she had in years, as though the weight she had been carrying had been lifted. The wishing star was still there, its glow gentle and steady, but she no longer felt the need to claim it. The peace she sought was already inside her, waiting to be discovered. The gatekeeper appeared once more, its figure standing tall in the clearing, watching Clara with a sense of pride. Clara met its gaze, and for the first time, she felt no fear, no hesitation. "You have found your answer," the gatekeeper said, its voice filled with warmth. "You have discovered the truth about yourself. The wishing star's gift is not to grant a wish, but to help you find the path to your own heart." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She didn't need to wish for anything anymore. The journey had already given her everything she needed. She smiled, feeling the weight of the world fall away, replaced by a deep, peaceful knowing. And as the wishing star continued to glow softly in the clearing, Clara turned and began her journey home, knowing that the true magic of the forest was not in the wishes granted, but in the discovery of one's own heart. Chapter 9, The Return. Clara's journey back to the village was different from the one that had led her into the woods. The path was no longer shrouded in fog, nor did it seem as mysterious or intimidating. In fact, the woods had opened up before her in ways she hadn't noticed on her way in. The trees no longer appeared as dark, looming figures but as old friends greeting her with open arms, their branches swaying gently in the wind, as if whispering secrets only she could hear. As Clara walked, she felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds chirping in the branches above, leaves rustling underfoot, and the distant trickle of a stream nearby. There was a peace to it now, a sense of harmony that Clara had never felt before. She had walked this same path before, but it felt entirely new, like she was seeing the world through different eyes. Her thoughts, once clouded by uncertainty and doubt, now seemed clear. She could almost feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, as though she were walking in rhythm with the world around her. It was as if the very act of letting go, of accepting her true self, had connected her to something deeper than she had ever known. As she approached the edge of the woods, Clara noticed the first hints of dawn beginning to break through the trees. The sky was a soft gradient of pink and gold, and the first light of morning spilled into the forest, casting long shadows on the ground. The village was just ahead, nestled at the foot of the hills. Clara's heart fluttered as she thought about her return. What would everyone think of her? Would they notice the change in her? She wasn't the same person who had left just a few days ago. Clara had spent so much time thinking that something was missing from her life, but now she understood that the absence had always been within her, waiting for her to realize that she had the power to fill it. It was as if the forest, the wishing star, and her time alone had revealed a truth she had overlooked for so long. Happiness and peace didn't come from external things. They were born from within. As Clara stepped out of the woods and back onto the familiar path that led to the village, she felt a sense of homecoming. The sounds of the village, laughter in the distance, the clatter of carts, the distant ringing of a church bell, were no longer reminders of the life she had wanted to escape. Instead, they were comforting, like a warm embrace from a place she had always belonged. She walked slowly, savoring the feeling of the familiar world around her, letting the memories of the forest and the wishing star fill her heart. As she approached the village square, she noticed a few villagers out and about, preparing for the morning. They looked up as she passed, some giving her curious glances, others offering friendly waves. Clara smiled in return, her heart swelling with a newfound appreciation for these simple, everyday moments. When she reached her home, Clara paused at the door. For a moment, she hesitated, wondering if the changes inside her would be obvious to those who knew her best. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and then pushed open the door. Inside, the fire was still burning in the hearth, the familiar smell of fresh baked bread filled the air, and the warmth of home surrounded her. Her mother, busy preparing breakfast in the kitchen, looked up with a start as Clara entered. "Clara! You're back. I wasn't expecting you so soon," her mother exclaimed, rushing to greet her. Clara's heart swelled as she met her mother's concerned gaze. She was no longer the uncertain, lost girl who had left the village. She had returned as someone stronger, someone who understood herself better. "I'm home, Mama," Clara said softly, her voice filled with a new sense of calm. She stepped into her mother's arms and embraced her tightly. The warmth of her mother's embrace felt like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. Her mother pulled back, looking at her closely. "You look different," she said, her eyes searching Clara's face. "There's something about you. It's like you found peace." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I have," she said simply. "I have." And just like that, Clara's life began to shift. It wasn't a grand transformation, but a subtle one, like the gentle turning of a leaf in the wind. She had found the peace she sought, not through the granting of wishes, but through the acceptance of who she truly was. The forest had shown her the path, and the wishing star had illuminated her way. As the days passed, Clara continued to live in the village, but everything felt different. She no longer yearned for something more, something beyond the life she had. The work she once found tiresome now felt fulfilling. The conversations she once dreaded now felt meaningful. The beauty of the simple, everyday moments became her focus, and she found joy in things she had once overlooked. She spent time with her family, cooking meals, walking in the fields, and chatting with her neighbors. She felt deeply connected to the world around her, the village, the people she had grown up with. And most importantly, she felt connected to herself. Clara no longer felt like an outsider in her own life. She had embraced her place in the world, and with that came a profound sense of belonging. As winter began to settle in, Clara noticed the first snowfall of the season drifting gently down from the sky. The village was blanketed in white, the rooftops and trees dusted with snow. It was a scene of pure magic, the kind that filled her heart with warmth and peace. The wishing star may have disappeared from sight, but its light still shone brightly in Clara's heart, guiding her forward. One evening, as Clara sat by the fire, her mother beside her, she reflected on her journey. She thought of the forest, the wishing star, the gatekeeper, and all the lessons she had learned. She realized that the true magic of the wishing star wasn't in the gift it granted, but in the journey it had set her on, a journey of self-discovery, of healing, and of acceptance. The greatest gift had not been a wish granted, but the realization that Clara was already whole, already complete. She didn't need to search for peace or happiness outside of herself. It had always been there, waiting for her to see it. And as the fire crackled in the hearth, Clara closed her eyes and whispered a quiet thank you to the forest, to the wishing star, and to herself. She was home. Chapter 10, The Quiet Glow of Christmas. As winter settled in, the village of Fernbrook embraced the deep quiet of the season. Snow blanketed the roofs of the cottages, turning the landscape into a scene straight out of a Christmas card. The cold, crisp air seemed to carry a special kind of magic, a silence that was at once peaceful and profound. It was the kind of stillness that invited reflection, bringing the world to a gentle pause before the rush of the new year. Clara found herself in the heart of this tranquility, and for the first time, she truly appreciated it. The hurried pace she had once known seemed a distant memory. It had been replaced by a slower, more mindful rhythm, a life lived in harmony with nature, with the people around her, and, most importantly, with herself. Christmas was approaching, and with it, the familiar traditions of the village. There was a sense of excitement in the air, but also a calmness. No one was rushing around, frantically preparing for the holidays. It was as if the village had learned to take its time, savoring each moment. Clara had returned to her role in the village, helping her mother bake bread, decorate their small cottage, and prepare for the holiday feast. The traditions of the season were simple but filled with meaning. On Christmas Eve, the villagers would gather at the church for a candlelit service, singing carols together before returning home to celebrate with family. Then, on Christmas morning, they would come together to share a meal, exchange small gifts, and enjoy the warmth of one another's company. For Clara, this year's Christmas felt different. There was no longing for something more, no yearning for a wish to come true. The magic of the season wasn't about grand gestures or expectations. It was in the small moments, the flickering candlelight, the laughter of family, the soft sound of snow falling outside the window. These were the gifts Clara had come to cherish, and she looked forward to sharing them with her loved ones. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Clara awoke early, just as the first light of dawn began to creep across the horizon. She sat up in bed, stretching her arms above her head, and felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The house was still and quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. She smiled to herself, thinking of all the preparations that awaited her downstairs. But before she joined her family in the kitchen, Clara decided to take a walk through the village. The streets were still sleepy, the occasional figure moving slowly through the snow. The air was fresh, and the sky above was a pale blue, streaked with pink and gold. As she walked, Clara felt a sense of gratitude for the life she had come to embrace, the simplicity, the quiet moments, the love that surrounded her. She passed by the homes of her neighbors, where wreaths adorned doors and lights twinkled in windows. The smell of pine and cinnamon filled the air, and Clara felt a warm, nostalgic smile tug at her lips. Christmas in Fernbrook was a celebration of togetherness, of homecoming, and of remembering what truly mattered. It wasn't about the perfect gift or the best decorations, it was about the connection between people, the shared moments of love and joy. When Clara returned home, her mother was already bustling in the kitchen, the scent of freshly baked bread and spiced apples filling the room. Clara rolled up her sleeves and joined her, helping to prepare the meal for that evening's feast. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the flickering candle on the table casting a soft glow over the room. As the day wore on, the village came alive with the sounds of Christmas preparations. Neighbors greeted one another with smiles and laughter, sharing small gifts and good wishes for the season. That evening, Clara and her mother made their way to the church, where the villagers had gathered for the candlelight service. The warm glow of hundreds of candles filled the church, casting long shadows on the stone walls. The soft melody of Christmas carols echoed in the space, the voices of the villagers blending together in perfect harmony. It was a moment of pure joy and unity, and Clara felt her heart swell with love for the people around her. After the service, they returned home, the air crisp and cold, the stars shining brightly above them. Clara's mother hung their stockings by the fireplace, while Clara carefully placed the small gifts they had prepared for each other under the tree. They sat down to their simple Christmas meal, roast meats, fresh bread, and warm vegetables, and ate by the glow of the fire, savoring every bite, every word, every laugh. As the evening wore on, Clara sat by the fire, feeling a quiet peace settle over her. She looked at the flickering flames, the soft light dancing on the walls of the room. It was in these moments, Clara realized, that the true magic of Christmas was found. Not in the presents or the grand celebrations, but in the quiet glow of a peaceful night spent with those you loved. She thought of the forest, of the wishing star, and of all the lessons she had learned. She had come to understand that life didn't need to be full of excitement or adventure to be meaningful. It was the simple things that mattered most, the love of family, the comfort of home, the beauty of a quiet winter night. As Clara drifted off to sleep that night, the snow falling gently outside the window, she felt a deep sense of contentment. She was exactly where she needed to be. The magic of Christmas, she realized, wasn't something to be found outside of herself. It was in every moment, every breath, every heartbeat. It was in the quiet glow of the season, and it was a light that would guide her always. And as the night deepened, with the fire crackling softly in the hearth, Clara knew that this Christmas would be the start of something new, an even deeper understanding of herself, of her place in the world, and of the peace that could be found in the simplest moments of life. As Clara nestled into her bed that Christmas Eve, the peace of the day settling over her like a warm blanket, she realized that the true magic of Christmas wasn't just in the holiday itself, but in the way it brought people together, in the quiet moments of love, reflection, and connection. She knew that this Christmas would stay in her heart for years to come, a reminder that the most precious gifts are often the simplest ones. And as you too reflect on this holiday season, remember to cherish the moments of warmth, peace, and togetherness that make this time of year so special. Thank you so much for joining us for this cozy Christmas story. We hope it brought some warmth to your heart and a little bit of holiday magic into your day. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Let us know your favorite Christmas traditions and memories. And if you want to be part of more cozy moments like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next festive adventures. We've got plenty more stories, inspiration, and holiday cheer coming your way. Wishing you a Merry Christmas and a joyful holiday season. See you in the next video.